Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Tattooing with Ben. I'm Ben, this is Pastime Tattoo. In today's video, I'm gonna paint a whole tattoo flash sheet from beginning to end. I'll explain a little bit about how I do stuff, what kind of stuff I use. If you know me, you know I love to paint tattoo flash. Anytime I'm not tattooing and I'm not doing the boring ass business side of running a tattoo shop, I'm painting. Also, the sheet of flash that I'm painting today, I'm gonna be giving away to one of you lucky subscribers. So you're gonna wanna watch to the very end of the video so you can know how you could be the lucky winner of this here flash sheet. So yeah, let's start the video. Before we begin, I do want to say something. I'm not going to be giving away any tattoo secrets. I'm not showing anyone how to tattoo. This channel will never be a learn to tattoo on YouTube kind of channel. What I'm showing in this video is just basically how I paint flash. I'm not saying this is the way to paint tattoo flash. This is just me painting tattoo flash the way I like to paint tattoo flash. I ain't really giving away any tattoo secrets about painting tattoo flash. Anything that's in this video can be easily found all over the internet, YouTube, libraries. I mean, it's just basic watercolor painting. So if you want to get at me about any of that, oh, you're giving away secret shit, miss me with all that. Before we start painting, we should talk about some of the supplies I use. When I line out my flash sheets, sometimes I use a pen, sometimes I use a nib. When I use a pen, I usually use these Identity pens. I like these because they're waterproof. It has a thick side and a thin side. I don't ever really use the thin side unless I'm doing some really small shit. But the real reason I like these is because it's waterproof. So once it dries, you're painting it with water and there's no smudging, no smearing, none of that. I'll put a link in the description for this below, so you can buy some of these if you want. And then if I'm not using a pen, I'll use a nib. A nib is kind of like the old calligraphy style pen. It's got the metal tip on it and you kind of just dip it in the ink and then line it out as you go. I think nibs are good, especially if you're learning to tattoo, because it kind of gets you in that muscle memory motion of dipping, lining a little bit, dipping, lining a little bit, dipping, lining a little bit. So it's good for the muscle memory. I'll put a link in the description below for these nibs too. And then as far as paintbrushes go, this is the brush that I use for pretty much everything. This is a 4-round watercolor brush. In the other cases, when I'm painting something big or if I'm staining a sheet and I want to wet it a lot and get a lot of area done at once, I have this big ass one. This is a 30 flat. You could just dip it in water and wet an entire flash sheet really quickly if you're trying to stain it or something like that. Bigger brush means you get to knock it out quicker, a little bit smoother of an application. Another big brush I use is a 10 round. It's basically the larger version of my 4 round if I'm doing larger scale pieces like that one. It holds a lot more water, which is good sometimes and bad sometimes. Another alternative to this one that I just got is a similar sized mop brush. The mop brush, I think, is called a mop brush because it holds a lot of water in it, much like a mop. It's very absorbent. What else I like about it is if you press it down, it has a big area that it covers, or if you ride off the tip, it has a very fine tip so you can get little detailed stuff in it, essentially making it pretty versatile. And then if I'm getting really tweaky on some details and I need a really tiny brush, I have this one, which is some sort of liner brush. I can't even see what number it is on there, but I've had these same brushes for 10 years, 11 years. I can't even see the brand on them anymore, but I'm pretty sure I can find them on Amazon. I'll put them in the link in the description below. Now let's talk about the paper. There's lots of different kinds of watercolor paper you could use. There's really good ones and then there's really shitty ones. And wouldn't you know it, the really good ones cost a lot more than the really shitty ones. You don't want to cut corners and cheap out when you're talking about watercolor paper. Flash sheets are traditionally 14 inches long by 11 inches high. Most of the time when you see flash racks in tattoo shops on the walls kind of like this, they're all 11 by 14s. That's always been the size for who knows how long. Just for scale, you can see this is an 11 by 14 flash sheet that I just painted. Brand I like to get is Arches. Best of the best. You ask any tattooer out there who paints watercolor flash that's good, they're gonna tell you they use Arches. Arches you could get in different sizes. They have pads, they have blocks of different sizes. They have 11 by 14, they have bigger. Sometimes I get the 11 by 14 blocks, and sometimes I get the big ass 10-yard roll of it. It's like a fucking carpet. Just roll that bitch out, cut whatever size you need. I'll link all those in the description below. Another thing I use when I'm painting tattoo flash, a little palette. These little plastic round palettes, they got 10 little spots you could drip your paints in. And one big spot you could put more paint in, or you could put your rinse cup. That's what I do. These things are plastic, they're relatively cheap. I'll link it in the description below. Of course, if you're gonna be painting, you're gonna need paint, dummy. Now there's lots of different kinds of paints you could use. A lot of different tattooers like using a lot of different stuff. I kind of mess around with a lot of different stuff, and even when I get on something that I really like, sometimes I get my hands on some other shit just to try it out and experiment. I recommend you do the same thing. Sometimes you could get stuff like this Winsor Newton India ink. You could get some FW liquid acrylics. Some people like using Dr. P.H. Martin Bombay style ones. They got these Liquitex ones. They got these fancy golden acrylic ones. They got Higgins India ink. Some of these are liquid acrylics. Some of these are actual watercolors. They got some that are in like the little toothpaste squeezy tube kinds. A lot of those are really good too. I don't actually have any of these right now, so I can't exactly show you, but I'll put a picture of it right here, and I'll put a link of all these in the description below. And then the last things I use when I'm painting flash is a cup of water for my rinse cup and a paper towel. All right, without further ado, let's paint some fucking flash. All right, so I got my sheet lined out. I used an Identity pen. I'm starting on the fan design. So you'll notice at first that I don't actually spit shade like most tattooers do. If you don't know what spit shading is, it's when you actually put the brush with the paint in your mouth and use your saliva to control the paint to water ratio on the brush. I only don't do it just because I was never taught that way. I kind of figured out how to paint on my own because my mentor, being more of a black and gray portrait Chicano style guy, he never really got into watercoloring until much later. So when I was learning, he was teaching me more of the stuff that he did more, which is like pencil drawing, acrylic painting, charcoal, all that. I just kind of figured out watercoloring on my own, and the method I used was dip in paint, dip in water, wipe on paper towel, and do it in such a way where I could learn to control the paint to water ratio on the brush that way. So now that I explained all that, you know what's going on behind the scenes, and I could just zoom in on the design. So you'll notice that I did all the light tones first. I just tend to do things that way because you could always go darker with things, but you can't, once you already go dark, you can't lighten them up really. So I always go light at first, and then once that part's done, if I need to darken things up, I could always do that. Also, kind of how I go about painting flash is I have somewhat of an idea of what I'm going to do. What things are going to be dark, what things are going to be light. When you're doing a black and gray sheet like this one, you don't have different colors to separate different elements, like color of the leaves to be different from the flower, so you could differentiate the leaves from the flower, and the color of the fan being different from the flower and the petals to differentiate that from the other. So the way to be able to do that, instead of separating it by colors, is to separate it by tones: dark, medium, light, etc. Kind of poses a little bit of a challenge because you have a little bit less resources to be able to separate the elements visually. Having said all that, if I have somewhat of an idea what things are going to be dark and what things are going to be light, I just kind of do that. But if I don't, if I'm stumped on a part, what I'll do is I will do what I know is going to be dark and do what I know is going to be light first, and just leave the parts that I'm not sure about. Because usually by the time I get to the parts that I'm not sure about, once the stuff that I was sure about is painted, I could visually see what the part I'm unsure about needs, whether it needs to be dark or needs to be light to have the proper amount of contrast and balance. Just finished that one up, so now I figured I'd just do a simple medium gray wash for the lettering. So what I do here is I have a separate cap with the black that I'm using with a little bit of water in it, so it's just automatically medium green. So now here I am doing the heart, and what I'm doing, because it's such a big area that I'm trying to have a smooth, clean, dark to light transition. And since it's such a big area, I lay down a wash first, which is what you call putting water down in the section that you're about to paint. So now that I added the paint to it when it's already wet with water, you could see it spreads a little easier and smoother. And as long as it's still wet, you can kind of manipulate where the pigment of the paint is, and you could kind of move it around before it dries. But once it dries, it's in there. And you'll notice if you put a wash on there first, as it dries, it'll kind of smooth out and have more of an even transition throughout. And if you were to just put the paint down first and then try to use a wet brush to spread it that way, it would be less even. So that's the reason why I put the wash down on this first. I usually do that on bigger areas, just to be able to have a little bit more control of how smooth the fade or gradient that I'm trying to do. The heart I did darker, so I figured the flames I'm going to do a little lighter. So I'm using that cap of medium gray to do these flames lighter. So I'll just kind of lay down the medium gray first, and then I get a little bit more of the medium gray on my brush and add like thicker amounts of medium gray on the tips. And as it dries, it'll kind of have like an even little slight gradient from the tip of the flame down to the bottom part of the frame. Nothing too crazy, just a very subtle fade. Now you'll notice I don't really like how light the heart is now that I put the fire on there. So just keep that in mind for later, and you'll see why. Because that fade in the heart looks kind of whack. So later on, you're going to see I'm going to come back to that and fix that up. But for now, moving right along. All right, let's stop for a second. Tell me, which one of these designs is your favorite? Do you paint like this? Do you paint a little differently? Let me know in the comments. I want to know what you think. All right, let's get back to it. All right, so now we're going to work on the ship. A lot of elements in this ship, so I'm going to start going lighter with things. I know that the sails of the ship are lighter, so I start with that. If I'm unsure about how I'm going to do the clouds or anything else, I always do what I know first. I know that the sails are going to be light, so I start with that. I use that medium gray and a lot more water on the brush, so that way the medium gray tends to be a little bit lighter. And I could always go back in there and darken it up if need be. Now, since this is sped up, it's hard to see exactly in real time the method that I'm using, but basically I'll lay down the paint like that, and then I'll go back with water on the brush and fade off of the edges of the paint. And I'll keep doing it and keep doing it until those edges just disappear into nothing, and that's what makes it look like a smooth, dark to light fade. You don't want to see the fade end at a hard edge because that just looks shitty. So in the flower here, I'm laying down a base of a light kind of medium gray, and then I'm coming back into that a little later because it looks kind of weak the way it is. So now I'm doing the clouds light as well. I wanted to make sure the clouds is light because you don't want to make background elements too dark and take away from the main focus. If you go a little too crazy on the background, the viewer's eye is going to be distracted from the main element, which is the ship. Now I'm starting to do the stuff that I know is going to be dark, like the leaves and these little pokey prongy thingies. To balance out the bottom parts being dark, I decide to make the flag on top of the ship dark. Since all the sails are light, I figured the actual ship part, the boat part, should be really dark. So I put a lot of black in there, and then I just barely fade off the tip of that black so it could separate that one side of the boat part to the other side. Same with the little pointy part, whatever the fuck that's called. Now here, I'm like, okay, what do I do next? I know these leaves are going to be dark, so I'll just go ahead and do those dark. And then once those leaves are darker in there, I can kind of see what the design needs to be balanced. You know, is that darkness of the leaves going to be enough, or do I need to add darkness to anything else? I won't really know until the dark elements of the leaves are already painted in there. So I'm just putting down black with no water on my brush, and then I go and put water on my brush and fade off the ends of that black. I don't put a wash before I do that because the water will kind of dilute the black, especially because it's in such a small space in the leaves, that I would have to end up going back in there and darkening it up, and it would take a little bit more time. So what do? I dip in the black and just put the black directly on the leaf, and then I go in there before that black dries with a wet brush and just fade off of the edge of it. That way the black that I initially put down stays dark, and just the edge that I'm fading off of is what lightens up. I can just get that done quicker. See, here's where I go back into that heart. I realize it looks kind of weak. There's too much medium tones in the heart that kind of conflicts with the medium tones of the fire, which doesn't give enough contrast. So I'm just bringing that darkness out further into the heart and just going to fade a little bit off at the top of the heart. That way there would be a lot more contrast between the heart and the fire, and which would separate those elements even more and make it easier for the viewer's eyes to see and differentiate between the heart and the fire. Look at that. Doesn't that look that much better? It looks a lot more of a strong design. So much better. And that's the thing. Sometimes when you've been looking at a design for so long, you don't see these things. You move on to another design and go back and revisit another one and realize it needs a little something. That's what I did there. So now I go back to the ship, do these waves, a little bit of dark parts. It's starting to look like this design's a little bit more balanced. And now this is where I start to see that flower is looking kind of weak. So once I finish these waves, I think I'm going to go back into this flower and add a little bit of dark parts fading in, just so it's not so bleh. Right here, see, just at the tips, and then I fade it in. So that way the light parts of the flower are still there, just the tips fades into that light part. And because I laid that light first layer, the fade from that black layer that I'm adding now looks a lot smoother as it fades out into that light first layer that I did. Because if I didn't have that first light layer, the fades off of this black might be a little more apparent where that fade ends. But since that light layer is in there, you can't really see where that fade ends, and it looks a lot smoother. See, doesn't that look a lot better? A little more contrast, kind of balance out the rest of that design. So then I just go and do a little fucking shade on these berries. And I think I get like a medium gray and just put little dots in this top part of the boat part. Looked like something was a little missing there, needed a little something. I think that might be it for that one. So moving along. My fucking big head gets in the way, so the focus gets a little fucked up in this snake design. So again, starting with the light parts, the parts that I know are going to be light. The underbelly of the snake. I'm using that kind of pre-mixed lighter gray. The blacks and grays that I'm using, they have kind of a bluish tone to them, and that's on purpose. I use Payne's gray instead of black because I really like the way that it has a cool tone to it as it fades out, as opposed to just a neutral gray, just for personal preference. Because bones are, traditionally like a whiter color, those are going to be shaded lighter. So most of that skull is going to be light, which means I know a lot of that snake is going to have to be dark too to be able to contrast that. But I know like the side part of the temple part of the skull is dark because it caves in a little more, so I do that. I decide I'm going to black out a few of these teeth. I know this under part of the jaw is darker. So the parts that I know are dark, I do that first. And the parts that I'm not sure about, I wait until the parts that I know are dark are done, so I could see what needs to be balanced out. I don't want to go too crazy dark on the skull because skulls are traditionally, lighter in color, so I don't want to overdo it. So I go light, the little corners, and I could always go back and darken it up like I always say. So start out light. Just get all the little edges in the skull, and then I could kind of go back in and darken them up. See, here I am darkening up some of the parts that I feel need a little bit more depth. Kind of show where things are overlapping other things. And now, the dark part of the snake. Once I got the dark parts of the snake painted, I could kind of look at the design as a whole and see if any other parts of the skull need to be darkened up. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I just got to darken up all the parts of the snake before I could see if this is done or if some parts need to be darkened up. So just like how I was explaining with the leaves of the other design, I just start putting the black down and then I wet the brush and fade off of that black just at the edge. Put the black down, water on the brush, and then I fade off of the edge of the black that I just laid down. To have a proper fade of dark to light, it's good to go from your darkest dark, just straight up black with no water, and then you fade out by putting water on it, getting medium tones and lighter tones. And then when you fade out to your absolutely lightest shade, you want to leave a little bit of open space of the paper, and that'll give you the lightest light, the darkest dark, and everything in between, which essentially is how you get the best contrast. All right, moving along to the final design, this dagger. Traditionally, I know the blade is lighter, especially since it's next to leaves, which is traditionally darker, so I'm doing those parts that I know is going to be lighter first. Now I'm using my 4-round to make the lines on these flowers. It's only because I'm very comfortable using that. Traditionally, maybe someone would probably use a liner brush, but I use my 4-round for pretty much everything, so I've kind of learned how to use it to make little lines and stuff. So now I start putting in parts that I know is going to be darker. I noticed that this light part was looking way too light, and the parts around it are also light. You need it to be dark to help the balance of it. If there's too many light parts all next to each other, it's going to look kind of weak in that top part of the design, so you want everything to look balanced as far as dark to light contrast. Leaves, I already know are going to be dark, so I bang those out. I filled that leaf completely black, just to show that it's a little further back than the other ones. You don't have to do all the leaves the exact same way. And you could just kind of fuck around, do shit a little different. Since the blade is light, the tip should be dark. Balance. Same with this part. I don't know the name of this part of the blade, but whatever it's called, darker. So you kind of sandwich that part dark, the blade light, and the tip dark. That's good balance, good contrast. Now I'm putting the dark ring around the middle part of the flower to show that the petals are behind it and the middle part is on top of it. And I've seen that this top part looks kind of weak, so put a little bit of light shade in there so it's not just plain ass white. So now that all the designs are done, I'm putting water all over the entire sheet. And because I used waterproof pen and waterproof paints, I could put water on it when it's dry and it's not gonna smear or smudge everything. Once it's dry, that shit's on there, done, permanent. So I water it to get a nice wash, and then I put my stain on there. I always start lighter with the stain because it's going to look darker when it's wet, and as it dries it'll lighten up even more. So I just start light, kind of get the whole thing like a nice little very light color of stain, and then as I go darker I just go around the edges, and usually I let it dry on its own. It has cool little textures, but most of the time I'm lazy, like right here, so I hit it with a heat gun. And then final touches, I stamp it with my name, my shop, the date, and bada bing, bada boom. It's all done, hung up in the shop. Only hung up until someone wins the contest, and I take it out of the wall, send it to you if you win. Well, there's the flash sheet. I hope you like it. I sure enjoyed painting it. I always enjoy painting. I want to hear from you. Do you like this flash sheet? Do you hate it? You ain't gonna hurt my feelings. Let me know in the comments below. All right, you reached the end of the video. I'm gonna need you to hit that like button, and then I'm gonna tell you how you could win this flash sheet, the original, in your hands, sent to your house, if you're the lucky winner. So if you want to win this flash sheet, all you have to do is this. My YouTube channel, Tattooing with Ben, it's pretty new. We're still pretty fresh, trying to get to 500 subscribers. So what I decided I'd do is, once I get to 500 subscribers, I'm gonna give this sheet away. But if you wanna be the one to get this flash sheet, here's what you gotta do. It's easy as pie, just pay attention. 1, you gotta subscribe to this YouTube channel. Easy as that. 2, you gotta follow me on Instagram. Here's the link right there. It's also gonna be in the comments. 3, you gotta follow my TikTok. Here's the link right there. I'll also link it in my comment. 4, you gotta follow my tattoo shop's Instagram. Here's the link. I'll also put it in the comments. And then once you've done all that, come back to this video and hit done in the comments. Once I reach 500 subscribers, I'll make a video where I pick one of these people that commented done. Of course, after I made sure they followed all those accounts that they had to follow. And then that lucky person, maybe it's you, will get that flash sheet, the original one that I painted in this video, sent to their house. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon so you can see my next video every time I drop it. And let's do this again sometimes. Catch you later.
Simple plan, okay? So don't fuck this up for me. This is my life, okay? Every single person out there is a potential new client.